The UAE hosts America's largest military base in the entire Gulf. Al Dhafra Air Base, American F-16s, American troops, American surveillance drones, launched from Emirati soil for decades. The UAE normalized relations with Israel. It hosts the U.S. Navy. It coordinates with American intelligence. It has done everything Washington ever asked of any Gulf ally and more. And yet, Saudi Arabia, the country that produced 15 of the 19 hijackers on September 11th, the country that orchestrated the murder of a Washington Post journalist and dismembered him inside its own consulate, the country that deliberately pumped oil to crush the American shale industry, that country just got 48 F-35 stealth jets, a $142 billion arms package, and formal designation as a major non-NATO ally of the United States. The UAE got none of it, not the planes, not the status, not the designation. And the reason why tells you everything about what Washington actually values in a Gulf ally, and it has nothing to do with loyalty. Let that sink in for a moment, because this is not a minor diplomatic footnote. This is one of the most revealing moments in the history of American foreign policy in the Gulf, a moment that exposes, with uncomfortable clarity, the gap between what Washington says it values in its partnerships and what it actually rewards. And to understand how we got here, we need to go back to the beginning of the UAE's relationship with the United States, because that story contains everything you need to know about why Abu Dhabi finds itself where it is today. The UAE and the United States built their relationship on a simple and mutually reinforcing logic. America needed a stable, sophisticated, English-speaking partner in the Gulf that could serve as a forward operating base for American military power, a financial hub for American business, and a diplomatic bridge between Washington and the broader Arab world. The UAE needed American military protection, American technology, and American political backing to maintain its security in one of the world's most volatile regions. The arrangement suited both sides perfectly. From the UAE's perspective, it was a bargain of extraordinary value. Washington's military umbrella in exchange for basing rights, intelligence sharing, and political alignment. From Washington's perspective, it was a bargain of equal value. A reliable, capable, pro-Western partner in the Gulf that asked for relatively little and delivered consistently. The centerpiece of this arrangement was Al Dhafra Air Base. Located in the desert south of Abu Dhabi, Al Dhafra is one of the most operationally significant American military facilities anywhere in the world. It has hosted U-2 spy planes that provided the United States with surveillance capabilities across the entire Middle East. It has launched B-2 stealth bombers on long-range strike missions. It has served as the forward hub for American air operations across the Gulf, the Arabian Sea, and Central Asia. When American forces needed to project power from the Persian Gulf, Al Dhafra was where they did it from. It was not a symbolic facility. It was a genuinely operational base that American military planners considered essential to the projection of U.S. power in the region. And the UAE provided it, not reluctantly, not as a negotiated concession extracted through economic pressure, but as a voluntary expression of strategic alignment. Abu Dhabi wanted America in the Gulf. It wanted American planes on its runways and American soldiers in its barracks. Because an America that was physically present in the UAE was an America that was committed to the UAE's security in the most credible way possible. Beyond the military dimension, the UAE built an economic relationship with Washington that was, by any measure, exceptional. Dubai became the regional hub for American corporations operating in the Middle East, the place where Fortune 500 companies set up their Gulf offices, where American banks processed their regional transactions, where American logistics companies managed their supply chains. Abu Dhabi's sovereign wealth funds deployed hundreds of billions of dollars into American financial markets, American real estate, and American companies, making the UAE one of the largest foreign investors in the U.S. economy. Emirati officials cultivated Washington's political class with a sophistication that even veteran diplomats acknowledged was unusual. Youssef al-Otaiba, the UAE's ambassador to Washington, became one of the most connected foreign officials in the American capital, a figure who moved effortlessly through Republican and Democratic administrations alike, who had personal relationships with secretaries of state, national security advisors, and members of Congress, who was consistently ranked among the most influential diplomats in Washington. The UAE spent decades making itself not just a useful American partner, but a genuinely embedded one, present in Washington's social networks, its think tanks, its fundraising circuits, and its back-channel diplomatic conversations in a way that most countries can only dream of. And then came the Abraham Accords. In August 2020, the UAE became the first Gulf state to normalize relations with Israel, a decision of enormous strategic significance that the Trump administration had worked to engineer and that carried genuine political risk for Abu Dhabi and the Arab world. The Abraham Accords were not a consequence-free gesture. In normalizing with Israel, the UAE aligned itself with the most politically sensitive relationship in the Arab world, invited criticism from Palestinian leaders, Hamas, Turkey, and Iran, and staked a significant portion of its regional credibility on the proposition that pragmatic engagement with Israel was the right path forward. It did all of this, in significant part, because Washington asked it to, because the Trump administration had made Israel normalization a central foreign policy objective and needed a major Arab partner to take the first step. The UAE took it, and in doing so, it gave Washington one of the most significant diplomatic achievements of the Trump first term. So here is the question that the events of November 2025 force us to ask. After all of that, after Al Dhafra, after the intelligence sharing, after the Abraham Accords, after 20 years of economic integration, after the most sophisticated diplomatic lobbying operation of any foreign country in Washington, why did Saudi Arabia get the F-35? Why did Saudi Arabia get major non-NATO ally status? Why did Saudi Arabia get the $142 billion strategic defense agreement? And why does the UAE have none of those things? To answer that question, you have to understand one of the most important and least discussed episodes in the recent history of U.S. Gulf relations. In 2020, the same year as the Abraham Accords, the same year the UAE was demonstrating its alignment with American and Israeli interests by normalizing relations with Tel Aviv. The Trump administration offered the UAE a deal to purchase F-35 stealth fighters. It was presented as a reward for the Abraham Accords, a tangible military benefit that would follow from the UAE's willingness to make peace with Israel. Abu Dhabi said yes, the deal was approved in principle. The contracts were being prepared. And then, quietly, Washington pulled back. The deal stalled, and eventually, under the Biden administration, it was formally suspended. The reason given, officially and consistently, was Huawei. The UAE had Chinese telecommunications infrastructure, specifically Huawei 5G equipment, embedded in its networks. American intelligence agencies raised concerns that transferring F-35 technology to a country with that level of Chinese access to its communication systems posed an unacceptable risk of technology compromise. The F-35 is not just a fighter jet. It is a flying intelligence collection platform, connected to a global network of allied sensors and command systems, and the idea of Huawei equipment anywhere near the systems that interface with it was, from Washington's perspective, genuinely alarming. The UAE spent the next 5 years trying to resolve this problem. It committed to removing Huawei equipment from its networks. It restructured its technology partnerships with Chinese companies. It engaged in a sustained and expensive effort to demonstrate to Washington's satisfaction that its digital infrastructure was clean enough to justify the F-35 transfer. American officials kept moving the goalposts, raising new concerns, adding new conditions, questioning whether the commitments made were being fully implemented. Abu Dhabi kept complying, kept adjusting, kept investing in the relationship. The F-35 deal remained perpetually just out of reach, always under review, always being evaluated, never quite materializing. And then, on the evening of November 18th, 2025, Donald Trump hosted a formal black-tie dinner at the White House for Mohammed bin Salman. Between courses, with cameras rolling and MBS seated beside him, Trump announced that he was keeping a little secret for that evening. The secret was Saudi Arabia's designation as a major non-NATO ally of the United States, the 20th country to receive that status, joining a list that includes Japan, South Korea, Australia, Israel, and Qatar. And in the same package, Trump confirmed that Saudi Arabia would receive 48 F-35A fighter jets, the most advanced combat aircraft in the American arsenal, as part of a $142 billion strategic defense agreement that also included 300 Abrams main battle tanks, advanced unmanned aerial systems, and a framework for deeper cooperation across defense, technology, artificial intelligence, and civilian nuclear energy. The UAE was not at that dinner. It was not getting those jets. It was not receiving that status. The country that had spent 5 years ripping out Chinese telecommunications equipment to qualify for the F-35 had not qualified. The country that had given America its most important Gulf military base had not been designated a major non-NATO ally. The country that had taken the political risk of normalizing with Israel to deliver the Trump administration its signature foreign policy achievement had received, as its reward, a deal that was suspended and never restored. And Saudi Arabia, which had done none of those things, which had not normalized with Israel, which had not provided the same level of unconditional military basing access, which had, in fact, spent years managing a deeply troubled relationship with Washington that included a murdered journalist, an oil price war, and years of American criticism of its conduct in Yemen. Saudi Arabia had collected everything the UAE wanted in a single evening at a White House dinner. The reaction in Abu Dhabi was not publicly expressed in dramatic terms. The UAE is too sophisticated a diplomatic actor to make its frustration visible in ways that would undermine its position further, but the signals were unmistakable to anyone who understood the relationship. In the weeks following the November announcement, UAE officials made a series of pointed statements about their own military modernization programs, accelerating discussions about acquiring South Korean F-35 alternatives, deepening procurement conversations with European defense companies, and publicly emphasizing Abu Dhabi's commitment to diversifying its security partnerships. These were not statements of indifference. They were statements of an actor that had just received a very clear message about its standing in Washington's hierarchy and was beginning to adjust its strategy accordingly. To understand why Washington made this choice, why MBS got what the UAE could not, you have to abandon the comfortable narrative that American foreign policy is primarily driven by values, by democratic principles, by loyalty to partners who share American commitments. That narrative has always been partially mythological, but the Saudi F-35 deal strips it down to its foundations in a way that is unusually transparent. Washington gave Saudi Arabia the F-35 for 3 reasons, and none of them have anything to do with Riyadh being a more loyal or more trustworthy ally than Abu Dhabi. The first reason is money. Saudi Arabia committed to investing nearly $1 trillion in the American economy. It committed to purchasing $142 billion in American defense equipment. It committed to making American defense companies, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, General Dynamics, central to the modernization of the Saudi armed forces for a generation. The F-35 deal is not simply a transaction. It is a strategic lock-in mechanism. Once Saudi Arabia is operating F-35s, it is dependent on American maintenance, American software updates, American supply chains, and American operational integration for the lifetime of those aircraft, which could be 40 years. The F-35 creates a structural dependency that binds Saudi Arabia to American defense architecture more deeply than any treaty or agreement ever could. From Washington's perspective, the Huawei concerns that blocked the UAE deal were not, at the end of the day, sufficient reason to forego that level of financial commitment and strategic lock-in from Riyadh. The money was simply too large, and the strategic dependency too valuable to let technology security concerns stand in the way. The second reason is geopolitical positioning. Saudi Arabia under MBS has been systematically building itself into the indispensable mediator of the Gulf region, between the United States and Iran, between the Arab world and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, between Washington and the broader Muslim world. The Islamabad quadrilateral that MBS assembled in March 2026 with Turkey, Egypt, and Pakistan was precisely the kind of multilateral diplomatic framework that Washington needed to manage the post-war regional settlement. Without committing American political capital to direct negotiations with every party, Saudi Arabia had made itself useful to Washington, not just as a basing partner and an oil supplier, the UAE's model of usefulness, but as a diplomatic intermediary that could produce regional outcomes that American power alone could not deliver. The F-35 and the major non-NATO ally designation were, in part, Washington's payment for that diplomatic service. They were the price of having a Saudi Arabia that would lean into American strategic objectives, rather than away from them in the most critical moment of regional instability since the Iraq War. The third reason is the most uncomfortable to state plainly, but it is the most analytically important. Saudi Arabia has leverage over Washington that the UAE simply does not have. Saudi Arabia produces roughly 11 million barrels of oil per day, and has the largest proven oil reserves on Earth. When Saudi Arabia makes decisions within OPEC about production levels, about pricing, about the denominating currency for oil transactions, those decisions affect the global economy in ways that no American president can ignore. The UAE produces oil too, but at a fraction of Saudi Arabia's scale. The threat of Saudi Arabia pivoting more decisively toward China, moving its oil sales into yuan, deepening the Belt and Road infrastructure investment relationship with Beijing, allowing Chinese military access to Gulf facilities, is a threat that keeps American foreign policy planners awake at night, in a way that an equivalent Emirati pivot simply would not. Saudi Arabia's leverage is structural and irreplaceable. The UAE's leverage is relational and replicable. And in Washington, structural leverage is what gets you the F-35. What makes this story so geopolitically significant is the precedent it sets. For 2 decades, the UAE operated on the assumption that its model, deep military basing access, intelligence sharing, financial integration, Israeli normalization, unconditional alignment, was the formula for maximum American partnership. The Saudi F-35 deal reveals that this assumption was wrong. Washington's hierarchy of Gulf relationships is not determined by the depth of operational military cooperation, or the warmth of people-to-people ties, or the number of years a country has hosted American forces. It is determined by strategic leverage, by financial scale, and by diplomatic utility. Saudi Arabia has more of all 3 than the UAE, and Washington has now made that hierarchy visible in a way that cannot be obscured by diplomatic language or reassuring statements about the importance of the bilateral relationship. The timing of the announcement, November 18th, 2025, during the period when the Saudi-UAE rivalry was already public and intensifying, barely 6 weeks before Saudi Arabia would bomb UAE weapons shipments in Yemen and issue a 24-hour ultimatum for Emirati withdrawal, was not accidental. MBS understood exactly what the F-35 deal and the major non-NATO ally designation communicated to Abu Dhabi. He had spent months preparing the ground: the Washington visit, the Pakistan defense agreement in September, the warming relations with Erdogan. The White House dinner was the capstone of that preparation, the moment when every piece of the architecture MBS had been constructing snapped into visible form simultaneously. Saudi Arabia gets the planes, Saudi Arabia gets the status, Saudi Arabia gets the strategic defense agreement, and the UAE gets to watch from outside, while Iranian missiles later light up its skyline, and its 5-year effort to qualify for the F-35 remains exactly where it was: nowhere. There's a detail in this story that deserves particular attention because it captures the specific nature of Abu Dhabi's miscalculation. When the 2020 UAE F-35 deal collapsed over Huawei, the UAE's strategic response was to treat it as a technical problem requiring a technical solution. Remove the Huawei equipment, demonstrate clean networks, satisfy the American security requirements. Get the jets. This was the correct analytical conclusion from the wrong analytical framework. The UAE treated the Huawei issue as the obstacle, when in fact the Huawei issue was the excuse. Washington needed a justification for not delivering the F-35 to a country it wasn't yet sure it wanted to elevate to that level of strategic partnership. Huawei provided that justification. But if the genuine will had existed in Washington to give the UAE the F-35, the Huawei issue could have been managed, just as Saudi Arabia's considerably more complicated history with American intelligence concerns has been managed to allow for an even larger and more strategically significant deal. The UAE spent 5 years solving the wrong problem. It solved the technical problem of Chinese telecommunications infrastructure, while failing to solve the political problem of convincing Washington that Abu Dhabi's strategic leverage and diplomatic utility justified the same treatment as Riyadh. This miscalculation has roots in a deeper confusion about what kind of ally the UAE actually is. Abu Dhabi has consistently presented itself to Washington as the reliable, predictable, unconditionally loyal Gulf partner. The ally that asks for little, delivers consistently, and never creates diplomatic complications. This presentation has its strengths: reliability and PR. Predictability are genuine virtues in an alliance partner, but they have a critical weakness. They reduce the cost of not fully rewarding the partner. If the UAE is going to maintain its American relationship unconditionally, regardless of how Washington treats it, and for most of the past 2 decades, that has been exactly how Abu Dhabi has behaved. Then Washington has little incentive to offer the UAE more than the minimum necessary to sustain the relationship. MBS, by rated a willingness to create complications, to threaten pivots toward China, to manipulate oil prices, to build alternative relationships with Russia and Turkey and India, that forced Washington to actively invest in keeping Saudi Arabia on the American side. The relationship that requires maintenance gets more maintenance. The relationship that is taken for granted gets taken for granted. When the Iran war began in February 2026 and Iranian missiles started falling on Abu Dhabi, the consequences of this dynamic became impossible to ignore. The UAE found itself in the position of fighting for physical survival, using American military technology that it had purchased, Patriot systems, THAAD batteries, while watching Saudi Arabia receive the diplomatic and military elevation that Abu Dhabi had spent years trying to secure. The F-35 deal reconfirmed in March 2026 at Trump's Miami summit. The Islamabad Quadrilateral assembled, without UAE participation. American designation of Saudi Arabia as a major non-NATO ally standing. The structure of American preference in the Gulf visible and unambiguous. And Abu Dhabi, for all its wealth and sophistication and 20 years of strategic investment in Washington, could not change any of it, because the leverage it had built was the wrong kind. The lesson that Abu Dhabi will draw from this, and that it must draw if it is to navigate the post-war Middle East successfully, is not that it should become less aligned with Washington. It is that alignment without leverage is not partners. HIP. It is dependency. The UAE has been the most loyal American partner in the Gulf. It has been the partner that asked for the least and complained the least and adjusted the most readily to Washington, as preferences, and it has received less strategic reward than a country that murdered a journalist, started an oil price war, and maintained a studied ambiguity about its willingness to remain in America's orbit. The conclusion is not comfortable, but it is clear. In the currency that actually matters in Washington, financial scale, structural leverage, and diplomatic indispensability, Saudi Arabia under MBS is simply worth more to the United States than the UAE under MBZ. And until that calculus changes, Abu Dhabi W will remain structurally outside the first tier of American Gulf partnerships, no matter how many American planes it hosts on its runways or how many Emirati diplomats attend Washington dinner parties. Mohammed bin Salman understood this before the UAE did. He built his leverage systematically over years, while Abu Dhabi was building its relationships. He created dependency in oil markets and diplomatic mediation in the financial architecture of American defense and sea industry investment, while the UAE was creating access. And on the evening of November 18, 2025, at a White House dinner with black tie guests and cameras rolling, he collected the reward for that leverage: 48 F-35s, major non-NATO ally status, $142 billion strategic defense agreement, in one evening while the UAE watched. The UAE thought it was America's closest Gulf ally. It thought that decades of military basing and intelligence sharing and diplomatic investment and Israeli normalization had earned it a position of irreplaceable partnership with Washington. November 18th, 2025, was the evening it discovered how wrong that assumption was. Not because America had turned against it, not because the relationship had collapsed, but because in the one moment that revealed Washington's true hierarchy of Gulf partnerships, the moment when America chose who gets the most advanced weapon it has ever exported to the region, the answer was not Abu Dhabi. It was Riyadh, and MBS had spent 3 years making sure of it. If you want to understand what Abu Dhabi does next, whether the UAE can rebuild its position in Washington, whether it eventually gets its own F-35 deal, and what the Gulf Alliance structure looks like when the Iran war finally ends, subscribe. Because the next chapter of this story is being written right now, and the UAE is going to have to fight for a position it once thought it already had.